I think that CBDCs or some kind of new controlled currency is going to be the future. Essentially, there will be a reset. So again, this dollar, this fiat dollar that we have will be worth basically nothing. At that time, people will be desperate, and that's when they will have shifted everyone over into the new system.
Welcome back to Collapse Life. I'm your host, Zara Sethna. If you haven't already done so, please hit the subscribe button to get access to all our latest episodes. When most people think of self-defense, they think of learning to fight, carrying a weapon, or maybe installing a home security system. But given the state of the world and what's currently being unleashed, financial self-defense is just as critical. The US dollar is facing unprecedented threats, but if you watch mainstream financial news, they'll tell you everything is fine. The people paying attention know that's a lie. Our guest today, Taylor Kenney, has made it her mission to expose what's really happening. As an economic journalist and analyst with ITM Trading, Taylor has been tracking the decline of the dollar, the weaponization of the financial system, and the quiet moves foreign governments are making to ditch the dollar entirely. Today, we're not just talking about economics, we're talking about survival. So Taylor, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Collapse Life.
Thank you so much for having me, Zara. I'm very excited to be here today. There is obviously no shortage of things that we can talk about.
Absolutely. We could turn this into a 3-hour Joe Rogan style interview, but we won't. I think we'll just stick to some tight, very important things. But let's just start. I've read you say that you are self-taught as an economic journalist. So I wanted to start with just asking, what was a turning point for you when you started to realize that the economic system wasn't what most people assume it to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I was lucky in the sense that I was raised with a healthy dose of skepticism around the financial system, and my grandparents and parents were big believers in sound money, precious metals. But it was really in 2020 when I became hyper focused on what was going on because I saw the insane amount of spending that our government was doing at a rapid rate. And I realized this is not sustainable, as everyone else did. And I started digging and digging and digging. And once I went down the rabbit hole, there really was no stopping. I think a lot of people can relate to that once you start going down, it never ends, right? The work never ends. And the more I learned, the more I became hyper-focused on how I could spread the message to others and try and help educate people. Because a lot of people know, like you said, that something's not right, but we're constantly being told everything's fine. So where's the disconnect there, right?
Yeah. And that's what makes it so hard. And I know you actually really purposely try to break things down and make it easy to understand. And as you, I think, described to Peter Greenwich recently, you try and pitch it to your Uncle Jim, who, kind of wants to know these things, but then doesn't want to go too far and might say, no, that's not what I'm hearing. So I really appreciate that about what you do. And I think that that's where there's a real link with what we're trying to do as well, because we're not necessarily a financial channel and we don't go as deep as ITM does, but we're always trying to make sure that people understand and are asking the right questions.
Absolutely. I think there's a misconception that it has to be complicated, and it doesn't, right? I think that there's a reason that they make it complicated. It's because the more complicated it is, the less that people understand. But we're really just talking about basic concepts here. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity to make it simple so that we can reach more people. And people want to understand these topics too. That's the thing. Yeah. They want to learn. They want to know what's going on.
Absolutely. I know that you were recently in Vancouver at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, and you gave a really interesting speech that was about the collapse of the dollar. So tell us a little bit about why that was the topic of your speech, and what do you think are the factors that are leading to the coming collapse?
Yeah, absolutely. That was an incredible event. The reason why I chose to focus my keynote on the collapse of the dollar is because there are so many people that I talk to who go, dollar collapse, you're just spreading fear. Dollar collapse, it hasn't happened yet. People have been saying it's going to happen forever. And I think it's because there's just a really big misconception around what dollar collapse means, right? people view it like this singular event. And what I always like to say is that it's a process that ends in an event, but it's really a process that's happening right now, and not only happening, but accelerating. We're experiencing that currently. So when we talk about dollar collapse, it's not to incite fear or say that the dollar is going to be worth nothing tomorrow. It's that the dollar has been worth less and less and less, and this is a process that's escalating. I really focus on four kind of main driving forces. The first being the United States itself, which again, I always kind of laugh at. It sounds counterintuitive that the United States would be the main driving force of the dollar losing value, but that's exactly what it is. We look at this spending that's been going on, this massive amount of spending. We're essentially putting our inflation on the rest of the world. Who wants to hold reserve assets that are going to be worth less and less? We have the weaponization of the dollar, right? So again, we look at what we did with Russian sanctions, and it's not about politics. It's not about whether you agree morally, whether that was the right decision or not. It's about the fact that if countries are holding the dollar as their reserve asset, they want it to feel like a safety net, a security, and instead, it suddenly feels like a risk. If you disagree with the United States, right, that can be used against you. The third thing that rolls right into is geopolitical risk. So again, we have the BRICS nations, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about today too. Again, banding together and realizing that they might have had the short end of the stick of this deal that was made a long time ago. And then lastly, technological advancements, which I know we're going to talk about more as well today too. But as the world modernizes and we have these new technological advancements, it becomes easier for countries to facilitate trade in their own currencies, cross-border payments, all of these things together. And I know that was a lot all at once, high level, but all of these things together are chipping away at dollar dominance. It's a fact. So if anyone out there is saying this is fear, it's not. I mean, it is scary, but this isn't meant to scare. It's meant to educate again.
Right, right. There's no point in ignoring it or burying our head in the sand and saying, well, everything's fine today. So I think it's really interesting that you describe de-dollarization as a process, because I think that is part of why people can push it to the side or bury it a little, because it's going slowly. It's an erosion. It's this, constant chipping away, but we don't necessarily feel it so acutely. Do you think that there are any tipping points that could actually move that slow erosion into something that's very sudden and overnight?
Yes, absolutely. So I think what I always like to do is I try and look at history as a tool to understand where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going. So if you look at the different events that have happened, what we can see is a pattern that the events that could be these kind of like trigger moments that accelerate de-dollarization are happening closer together, which is why we're feeling things speed up. So let's say if we look at different events throughout time, such as 2008, right? And then we have, let's say, the massive amount of spending in 2020. And then we have sanctions coming, a year, 2 years later. These kind of bookmark events are happening closer and closer together, and we can anticipate they'll continue to happen. We don't really know what's going to happen over this next year. There's already a lot of flurry about geopolitical tensions and different dynamics that are going on, escalating wars. We could have OPEC countries moving away from pricing in dollars. There's all these different things, but these events that are kind of pushing this move away from the dollar are happening closer together, which is kind of creating this acceleration. I describe it as a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts small and it picks up speed, picks up snow, and eventually you can't stop it, right? It's out of control. And right now we're rolling down that hill at a faster pace.
Yeah. You mentioned OPEC, and I think that's one of the major factors and one of the things that you pointed out in your keynote. So the foundation for the dollar's dominance up till now is that oil has been priced in dollars, but major energy exporters like Saudi Arabia are looking to pivot away from dollar settlements, and that's like a part of the BRICS conversation that we'll continue to have. How quickly do you think that move might escalate so that the whole petrodollar system kind of unwinds?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, it really is the foundation for dollar dominance. The United States, Kissinger, we are very smart in making sure that we guarantee dollar dominance by making sure that there was always this artificial demand for dollars. Because as long as there's a demand for oil, there's a demand for dollars because everything is priced in dollars. If that were to change, we could see inflation leading to hyperinflation happen rapidly. Now we're not talking about this kind of slow moving train. We would be talking about an immediate escalation. Now, there's a lot of people out there who will say, well, okay, but that's not going to happen. It's not in their interest, which is true today, right? There is a reason that they haven't moved away yet. But to think that they're not flirting with the idea, to think that they're not already meeting with these BRICS nations, to think that these countries aren't exploring their options, they would be foolish not to, right? And I think, again, it's just a matter of time. When, I can't tell you. Is it tomorrow? Is it a year? I don't know. But when that happens, yes, absolutely. I would expect to see a rapid increase in prices across the board.
Yes, of course. So do you think that we might end up with some sort of a splintered approach where some countries in OPEC still use dollars for their transactions, others are using yuan or rubles, or eventually when there is an alternative from a BRICS commodity-backed system, do you think it'll just be multipolar, or do you think everything will kind of magnetically kind of center around a new alternative?
That's a good question. I think we're moving towards I mean, multipolar is absolutely the future, right? That's where we're going. I think that I don't imagine it's all going to happen at once where everyone comes together and they all agree, okay, all at once, we're all shifting away and this is the move we're doing on this date at this time. I think it will be a process. I think that certain countries will move first before others. That being said, we are moving closer to a neutral settlement currency. I know that there's been a lot of talk around BRICS nations banding together and creating a commodity backed currency, which I think will happen. That being said, I think what's going to happen first is this kind of neutral settlement currency where countries are able to trade amongst themselves in a way that doesn't rely on the dollar, right? Going outside the dollar. I think once we have that ability, it's only a matter of time. The technology exists today. It's just not anything that's able to be used currently, but it is coming because the technology is there and the need and the demand is there.
Yeah. And the fact that the BRICS countries haven't yet pulled the trigger on something new, as you said, doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't just crossing their T's and dotting their I's on a plan that's very well developed already.
Correct. And that's something I talk about too is we see these threats, right, from President Trump, 100% tariffs on any country who even whispers moving away from the dollar, right? This was something he just doubled down on again last week, saying that any BRICS country who considered moving away from the dollar, 100% tariffs, boom, done. The thing is that we might see a shift. I think so far BRICS has been pretty boisterous in a lot of what they've said that they're pursuing or what they're doing. We might now not hear so much news coming out. We might not know exactly what they're up to, but to assume that that means no progress is being made would be a grave miscalculation by us because I think ultimately nothing has slowed down, nothing has stopped. They might just be doing it much more under the radar, which in some ways could be more dangerous.
Absolutely. And it would make sense. Obviously, why broadcast what you're doing if it's going to trigger some sort of aggressive response? So, do it quietly. And when you're ready, you strategically release whatever it is that you're planning.
Exactly.
You mentioned the tariffs, but we're already sort of seeing the character of this new administration. Do you think that there might be other responses from the US that might involve, say, the military or, even more escalated geopolitical tensions as the world starts to move away from the petrodollar?
I think it's definitely a possibility. That being said, I think President Trump has shown us over time that it's not in his best interest or his wishes. He doesn't really want us to be involved in these boots on the ground wars, right? Like that hasn't been how he's led so far. It's not something he's really threatened. I think, again, with his background in business, he likes to kind of do this blitz, tariffs on the table, dollar, right? Boom, 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 boom. This is more of his maneuvering. It's not to say it's off the table or that he won't threaten it. I just just don't think it would be his first option. So I think that what he's doing right now is he knows 4 years is going to go really fast.
Yeah.
He's trying to do as much as he can right now to front load all of this. Hopefully things calm down by midterms and he can make some progress, whatever that progress is by the end of 4 years. Again, I'm not sure if it's going to be successful or not. That being said, I think that is his tactic. That's what I anticipate, but we'll see. It doesn't mean it's off the table.
Yeah. Let's paint a picture for all the Uncle Jims out there. If the petrodollar does dissolve, and whether that's, as you say, over the next year or 5 years or whatever the horizon is, what is that going to look like for average Americans? What kind of price shocks will they start to see? What will the world feel and look like?
Yeah, it's funny because it's not something that we've really experienced, right? We look at these other countries like Venezuela or Argentina, but they were never the center of the universe the way that the United States is today. So we have a sense of what a currency collapse looks like, but not when it's the reserve currency. So I think there are a lot of people out there who are underestimating the impact that this would have across the board on everyday Americans and honestly on everyone across the world. Essentially, what we could expect to happen is that the dollar's value would be reduced significantly. Of course, in a hyperinflationary situation, we'd see prices rising dramatically in short periods of time. And it wouldn't just be the dollar itself, right? I always like to remind people it's any dollar denominated assets. So the stock market, right? Retirement, any savings that you have, it essentially would be a completely new world. Unrecognizable is kind of how I think we could sum it up in one word.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think this is where people get afraid and they
Right.
think I can just look away and not pay attention to this and just carry on with my life and maybe I'll be dead by the time this happens. So
Sure. I know a lot of people like to say that, but I think again, and maybe that's why I do emphasize that it's a process, is that do I think that there will be this kind of this one landmark watershed event that happens? Yes. At the same time, is it important to understand the process? Because what if things aren't 100% worse in a year, but they're 50% worse, right? Like it doesn't, it still is going to impact every component of our life. It doesn't have to be full out apocalypse for it to hurt and to really ruin everything that you might have built. And again, change the way that we understand life today.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The national debt is another really big, heavy burden on the economy. We're already at, plus 34 trillion and it's growing so fast. So let's talk about that a little. It's something that we've talked about on this channel before, every time we have Peter Greenwich on. But let's talk about it again. At what point does the interest on that debt become just impossible to repay? And what are the choices then that the government has in front of them?
Definitely. I think it's a great question because, again, this goes back to this whole boy who cried wolf, where people have been talking about the debt forever. So today we do have a different situation, but people like to tune it out because they go, well, everyone's been screaming about the debt forever and nothing has happened, right? Well, first of all, a lot has happened. Obviously, our dollars were significantly less and it's prompting countries to move away from the dollar, ripple effect. I could go on and on. But what else is different today, as you mentioned, is of course the interest payments on the debt itself. So it's no longer just a situation of us carrying this massive debt burden, but we now have over $1 trillion annually that we're having to spend just to finance the debt. This is putting us in an incredibly precarious situation, especially because we kind of could see this doom loop happening with debt where as we need to spend more, I know we're trying to cut, but ultimately what happens? If we cut too much, then people lose jobs, unemployment rises, suddenly you need more government intervention. And what requires that? More spending. And then you kind of have this never-ending cycle of debt. I think we've entered this phase where the writing's on the wall. There's really no going back. It's almost just leaning in. I don't know how much longer it can go on for, to be honest, because it is unsustainable, period.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that it's just going to carry on business as usual? Do you think there's going to be some sort of black swan event? Or is this where the new technologies that we talked about a little bit earlier comes in as some sort of a a new way of solving this unsolvable problem?
Yeah, I often look at who is benefiting. So right now, there's still profit to be made. That would make me think that things are going to continue to be run up, right? This everything bubble that we're in is going to continue to grow. People are going to continue to profit until it reaches a breaking point. Now, that breaking point could be anything, like you mentioned Black Swan, right? Like whatever it is, something is going to happen and there will be a crisis, whether it's a natural crisis because who knows, there's so many interconnected parts right now and any of them could ignite a fuse at any time, or manufactured crisis, I don't know. But whatever that crisis is, it's going to drop rates down to zero. It's going to allow the government to spend, refinance debt, and it's going to allow them to usher in whatever kind of new system they're concocting. Now, this might sound a little bit wild. I like to live in fact for sure. So I'm going to say this is speculation. I don't have some inside track, right, to know exactly what's going to happen. This is just looking at where we are today, again, where we've been, where we could be going. I think that CBDCs or some kind of new controlled currency is going to be the future. Essentially, there will be a reset. So again, this dollar, this fiat dollar that we have will be worth basically nothing. At that time, people will be desperate, and that's when they will have shifted everyone over into the new system. CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, of course, are a programmable digital fiat currency that is owned and operated by the central bank, the Federal Reserve. So just really give them complete control over the citizens. And if it comes at a time where there is a crisis, people will be a lot more open-minded to adopting something that maybe they're resistant to today. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you that this is speculation, but you're not the only one who's saying or thinking it. There are definitely other people who are asking the same question. Could the US government intentionally crash the system in order to clear house and bring in this new digital currency system? So it's definitely a theory that people should consider. They should turn it around in their heads and wonder why. And then if it does happen, well, at least they've thought about it ahead of time. And you know, having said that, like, what do you think? A lot of people ask this. It's the big why. What is the end game with CBDCs?
I mean, complete control, right? Complete control. And I think, again, like I said, right now there's still profit to be made. But what happens when when the unsustainable finally kicks in and there's nothing left to be made? Well, then they have to create a new system, right? A new system of control. And during these huge events, when there's a crisis and a new system is ushered in, what happens? It's a massive wealth transfer. Right. So again, I always look at who benefits, right? In 2008, in 2020, it wasn't the average everyday American. Why do we have this growing divide between the haves and the have-nots? It's because every time all of these funds are pumped into the system, it doesn't go directly into the pockets. It might temporarily, right? Like we saw the stimulus spending in 2020, but who really benefited from them? It was the people who already had wealth. They were the ones who were able to play the game and amass even more wealth and set themselves up for a better position. So I think we're going to continue to see this divide of the haves and the have-nots, the disappearing of the middle class, and it's going to be consolidation of wealth. And I think it's a consolidation of wealth and more control. And I think that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Oh, bleak. Do you think that we'll get to some solutions at the end? I hope.
Okay. I know.
I think there's so much that still we need to talk about in terms of all the different plays that are happening, so people understand it. And it's not all. Well, it is bleak, but there are things that people can do, and we'll get there. I wanted to ask though about this this massive wealth transfer. Do you think that involves actual open confiscation of private assets? Do people lose their retirement accounts or their gold just in order for the government to maintain liquidity?
Yeah, I absolutely think there's a component of that. I think that ultimately the way everything's set up, most people, we know today Americans have a record amount of debt, right? So I'm talking about consumer household debt is at all-time highs. I think that when we look at debt, I'm really, again, against debt. Not saying that people shouldn't use it as a tool, but ultimately they've got you, right? Like if rates go through the roof, if they're able to pull the rug out from underneath you, if your dollar's no longer worth anything, they're able to come in, they're able to take your assets. It's a real concern. And I think, again, it just shifts the wealth more to the already wealthy. And that's what happened in the Great Depression too, right? There were a lot of people who lost everything, and the wealthy continued to grow and the have-nots continued to be nothing. I think that when we look at different assets, I think there could be gold confiscation again. What's really important here too to understand is what kind of assets you hold. So even with gold, for example, in 1933, there was a loophole created for the wealthy elite. They confiscated bullion, right? Like pure gold. But what they made a loophole for were collectible numismatic coins that had a rare collectible value in addition to the gold content itself. Why did they do that? Because there were already wealthy elites who had these coins and wanted to make sure they were able to keep their gold, even if the masses turned in their gold. So that is why, again, if you want to learn more about that, I personally am a big believer in making sure that you understand what kind of gold and silver you're buying, because they have different functions. And we could expect to see the same thing today, understanding the loopholes that are in place. So there's a lot of knowledge and history that goes into this. But the short answer is yes, absolutely. I think that confiscation across the board could be happening, whether it's, like you said, draining retirement, whether it's taking the underlying asset, and not to go too down a whole nother rabbit hole too, but tokenization is another thing I've been following very closely, which is the tokenization of real world assets. So essentially creating ownership in the digital world for a real world asset. And I think that would make it much easier for these big banks or institutions to come in and take assets from people as well.
Wow, that is a rabbit hole that we probably don't want to go too deeply down now, but I would love to hear more about that. So maybe in another
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've painted a picture of only some of the many challenges that we're facing. And yet, if you're driving in your car and you're listening to the news ticker, you keep hearing that the stock market is defying expectations. It's going up and up and up. And you already said, there are still profits to be made. So we have all this rising debt, we have inflation, we have overvaluation, we have all this global instability. What is keeping the stock market afloat, and when does it implode?
Absolutely. I mean, there's two things keeping it afloat right now. Number one is debt, right? Government spending. We continue to crank out all of this capital, this cash, boom, 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 boom into the system. It's propping everything up. Number two is speculation. It's not real growth. It's not real growth, right? Like what we saw in the dot-com bubble was absolutely speculation around the valuation of these companies. It's not to say, again, that the internet didn't revolutionize the world. Obviously it did. But the companies themselves, the stock market itself, no one knew what to value it at. Today, we have the same thing happening with AI. Again, AI is already revolutionizing the world, not to say that it won't continue to do so, but the companies that everyone's throwing all their chips on, gambling on, it's all speculation. No one really knows what to value them at. And we've seen a lot of this, especially over the last 2 weeks, as more things are coming out from China, whether it's DeepSeek or Alibaba's AI, essentially showing, hey, we might be able to do the same thing you're doing, except better and at a fraction of the cost and with less resources. Right. Suddenly, the valuations that everyone's been gambling on doesn't look like such a good gamble anymore, right? And anytime you invest in a business, you should be looking at the metrics of that business, not just because your neighbor told you, hey, go ahead and put everything in on that. You're going to miss out if you don't. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing this kind of like mania right now that's driving it. It's not real sustainable growth.
And so, I mean, I think that's a really interesting piece of it. But as you said, this is an everything bubble. It's not just an AI bubble or a real estate bubble or the dot-com bubble. This is the everything bubble. So what are the main kind of weak points within that? What do you think will start to tumble first?
That's a tough question. Everything is so interconnected. And I'm talking about in the United States and globally. We are more interconnected than ever, which means that our risk is that much higher. Because it used to be that maybe there was this one risky component or this one risky component, and if it collapsed, it would just impact this certain part. But today, everything is built on top of each other, right? Like if we were to look at commercial real estate, which the news has completely forgotten about, no one's talking about, but if you drive down the street, those offices are still empty. That mall is still vacant, right? Commercial real estate is still a huge problem. Well, is going to who is going to have problems from that? It's going to be the banks, right? The banks who are holding these loans, the banks who have all these unrealized losses. If the banks suddenly needed to cash in and get more liquidity, well, they're not able to because they'd have to sell everything at a loss. Suddenly now you have a bank run. Or if we have something go on in the stock market, like I was just talking about, something happens in China, it impacts the United States. We have, again, all of this debt, consumer level on the United States. I mean, the list again goes on. And we haven't even touched on wars or geopolitical risk and escalating tensions across the board. So I know it's kind of a non-answer, but essentially it could be anything. And I think, again, what people are failing to realize that's so different in today's world is just how interconnected everything is. So any single one of these at a moment's notice could set off a trigger that would bring down the entire system.
Right. So it's it's hard work because you have to keep your eye on everything and see the connections between all of it.
Correct.
Just going back to the 4 pillars from your keynote, what have we not touched on yet? What's standing out that, because I do want to kind of cover as much as we can about painting the picture of all the different challenges, and then we can move on to what people can do to position themselves within that.
Definitely. I think that something that is just going to be huge, and I know we've talked about it before, and I know a lot of people are talking about it, but again, I think this idea of the rest of the world moving away from the United States is just something that here in the United States, a lot of people don't want to hear or don't understand. But ultimately, what we're seeing is it's not just their desire to move away. It's that the technology, again, today can support their move away. So I have talked to people who are shocked to discover that it is not easy for countries to trade in their own currencies. They go, what are you talking about? It's 2025. This is like a crucial piece a lot of people are missing. I go, they have to trade in US dollars. Well, why? How is that possible? Well, the technology isn't set up today, and countries don't know if they can trust each other's currency. Recently, these countries have banded together, and the technology has been created to create cross-border payments. Now, the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, was helping facilitate this project. It was called Project Bridge. Mm-hmm. Once it reached viability, the United States actually, we think behind closed doors, came in and said absolutely not, because they knew it would be a nail in the coffin. Project Bridge at that point kind of got kiboshed. It got put on the back burner. But these countries are still pursuing this project just by a different name and without the support of the BIS. So what I want people to understand is the technology is there. And just like any advancement in technology we've seen in humankind, if the need is there for it and the technology exists, no matter who's trying to stop it, whether it's regulators or some big business or whatever it might be, it will find a way forward. So these countries, they are truly moving forward with a way to move outside of the dollar. And as that happens, again, the dollar's on borrowed time. So I don't know if that answers your question. I just think it's like a really critical piece that a lot of people don't understand. Again, not by their fault. It's not something that's taught. Yeah.
It's not something that's discussed either. Again, in the mainstream financial media, you aren't hearing that. The other thing I think that maybe some of our Collapse Life viewers are aware of, but that it's not being talked about and a lot of people aren't going to be aware of, is how much other countries are stockpiling gold. And what that means. So talk a little bit about what that means. What does it signal? Do you think that there will be the return of some kind of a gold-backed monetary system, even if it's unofficial or even if it's limited to, again, trades between certain countries? What does that signal?
Absolutely. So it's a great question, because a lot of people will also ask me, okay, so even if we believe everything you're saying with the dollar and we get it and we see the facts, if countries are moving away from the dollar, what are they moving towards, right? What other currency are they moving towards? It's not that they're moving towards another currency. They are moving towards commodities. Now, gold in particular, over the last decade or so, really the last 15 years following the 2008 great financial crisis, banks have been ramping up their purchases of gold. Now, the BIS, again, the Bank for International Settlements, has made gold a tier 1 asset, meaning it is like the top level on par with the dollar, which is kind of funny, but it's essentially liquidity. It's good to go. It is secure because there's no counterparty risk. All of these countries who have been afraid of the United States, they can't just ditch their dollar reserves or rush into another currency. What they're doing is they're slowly reducing the dollar reserves and moving into gold.
Right.
Now, again, the reason they're doing this is because trust in fiat currencies, not just the dollar, but all fiat currencies, has been diminished because there's so much debt globally that no one trusts these fiat currencies. And all these central banks understand, they see the writing on the wall. It's like I always ask, what do they know that we don't? They are preparing for this reset, for this collapse. And how are they doing it? They're buying gold because they know that they can't trust a fiat currency, but they can trust gold. So a lot of people speculate, does that mean it is a gold-backed currency? Are we returning to the gold standard? I, again, don't know exactly how it's going to look, what the future will look like. But the short answer is yes, there is going to be gold at the focus, at the center of whatever the future looks like, because it's the only way that people are going to be able to trust. Again,
Right.
no one's going to go down this new rabbit hole fiat. I mean, again, we might be forced into it with CBDCs or something of that nature, but no one is voluntarily going to say, I trust your word, I trust your fiat currency. It's just not going to happen.
Uh-huh. There are some stresses, though, even in this conversation about gold. So just recently, and I'll ask you to maybe talk about this a little bit, but
Yeah.
there's been some delays in delivery of gold coming out of London. Is this a signal that maybe the gold supply is drying up, or that that there isn't necessarily the trust that we think that there should be, that I am buying gold and my gold will be delivered to me, but maybe actually there's a little bit of faith going on there too?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is when we look at gold, you can think about it in different ways. There's physical, tangible gold, right? Like gold that you you own. That's what most people think of when they think of gold. When we talk about like the COMEX or the Bank of England or whatever's going on here, there's also paper gold. Now, the difference between the two is paper gold is essentially a promise that you buy gold or that you're going to have gold delivered on a certain date, futures around gold. And it's the same way that banks work with a fractional reserve system. So if you go and deposit $100,000 into your bank, they're not going to keep all $100,000 of your deposit in your bank, right? Like they don't keep 100% of deposits. They legally could keep 0%, right? Or as little as they want. And they loan out all that money and they do whatever they want with it. And they just hope that a bunch of people aren't going to come at once and ask for their deposits, a bank run.
Right.
That's essentially what we're seeing happen right now in London, is that there were all these promises around gold, all the speculation around gold, much more so than the actual gold reserves that they had. Now that there's a lot of concerns and people are going and trying to cash in on their gold, the gold is not there. They don't have enough gold. So do I think that gold is drying up? No, I mean, I think gold is a finite resource. There is how much there is how much has been mined, period. But I think that what we're actually seeing is an exposure of this kind of fake paper gold system that has been built, which again is why I personally am such a strong believer in owning and holding your own physical gold, not just the paper gold, because while that might look good on your portfolio, it doesn't do you any good if you go and you say, hey, I want my gold, the system is crashing, the sky is falling, and they say, oh, yeah, for sure, you can get it in 2 months, you can get it in a year. You know, it's essentially just a way of saying, no, you can't get it. And then it does you no good. Yeah.
Exactly. But then, let's say someone sells their house, they have $300,000 and they think, oh, I've listened to all these smart people telling me that I should be putting my money somewhere tangible. I'm going to buy gold. What do? You can't have $300,000 of gold tucked under your mattress, can you?
I mean, it depends. That's always the tricky part, right? So to your point, no, I think that again, there is a difference though between, let's say, vaulting your gold, holding it in a safe space again, having it physically, putting it in that vault versus signing a piece of paper saying that you own some percentage or fraction or this or that, or that at a future date you can get it. They're different things, right? Like, again, I think it's kind of like putting your grandma's jewelry or whatever in your safe deposit box. Of course, there's always going to be a risk. Do you trust the bank, right? It's inherent. But at the same time, you know that that jewelry is in there. You put it in there yourself versus just someone telling you you bought something and you take their word for it. I think the counterparty risk goes up higher at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. So for anyone who's listening to this, who suddenly feels like, aha, I get it. I understand all the things that are facing us now, but I haven't actually made any preparations yet. Where does someone start? And obviously gold is going to be a piece of that answer, but what other tangible assets could people consider as a hedge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also like to preface this by saying I'm not a financial advisor. Very important, right? And everyone's situation is different. And I truly believe that because it depends on what your current situation is, what you're concerned about, and what your goals are. So I can't give blanket advice to people. That being said, if it were me personally, I always, again, want to make sure that you're debt free, I think is important as much as possible. I think diversification is huge. I like to be pragmatic about this. And I always tell people I'm not opposed to people making profit today, right? I'm not saying that. I'm not locked away in some castle saying only hold gold. If you can make profit today, that's great. But be smart about it. Too many people, I think, get addicted to the game. And again, this goes back to why people always ask me, when is this happening? The only reason people ask me when, if they believe it's going to happen, the only reason you're asking when is so that you know when you can get out. Right. And I think, again, it's a wrong way to think about it. If you know that things are crumbling and you know that this is coming, then you need to be prepared ahead of time.
Yeah.
Don't wait. Right. And I always say, personally, for me, gold and silver is the insurance policy because it only works if you get it before something happens. If you get it after, it doesn't do you any good. But gold and silver, of course, land. I think also my background is in emergency preparedness. So community is huge too. I think that looking outside of the financial system and making sure that you have a really good community, because if oil and food and trade lines are disrupted and whatever else might go on as part of this, making sure that you have different lines of communication with people in your neighborhood, in your network, in your community will be essential as well.
Yeah, that is something that we have said here before as well. It's a big challenge because there's a real sense that there's groups of us who are having this conversation, who are doing the right things to be prepared, but also to live in today. But then there are the other people who maybe your neighbors who don't want to hear it or just don't understand it or are just so busy trying to get through the day that they just don't have the bandwidth to be able to kind of even put to doing the research to figure this out. So finding that community, it's not like you can just pick a village in Montana and say, I'm going to move there because everyone is doing what I need to do. So it's such a good piece of advice, but it's also so hard to figure out how. And I don't have an answer for it. I'm not going to ask you necessarily unless you have ideas. But
I mean, it's true. It's a challenge. It's funny because where I work now, I work with a lot of like-minded people, and I'm very blessed because of that. My community has grown exponentially. I will say, however, that prior to this, I did have success in different ways. They might not be the same for everyone, but finding local fire departments often will have different training programs, whether it's volunteer, community outreach. A lot of times you'll find like-minded people there. Going to farmers markets and not just buying from the farmers market because that won't always be there, but talking to the actual people who are there locally in your community, exchanging contact information, getting to know them. I've been able to find different people that way as well. So there are ways to do it. It's just, to your point, not easy, right? You kind of have to put yourself out there and put in the effort. But if it's not your immediate family, friends, or neighbors, you're just going to have to kind of go that extra step. But those are some places that I found success as well.
Right. I think that's brilliant. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about the coming collapse, assuming, as we do, that things are changing very rapidly? And that could be financial, but other? I mean, you have this background in emergency preparedness, so you've really been thinking about this from a long continuum. So, what do you think people really misunderstand, or what assumptions do they need to just abandon?
Well, I don't want to end on another doom and gloom note here, but truly my answer is I think a lot of people are underestimating what this shift is going to look like. I think a lot of people view it like something that's going to be temporary. I think they view it as, oh, maybe things will go down or maybe things will be bad for a year or two. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't grasping, again, the gravity or the scope of how this is going to change all aspects of our life. And I mean, nothing is permanent, but I just don't think it will look the way it once did, right? Like there will be a new iteration. It won't be whatever happens is how it's always going to be, but it's not just going to be some temporary. I think we're too far gone at this point that whatever comes next is going to truly change the way we view the world.
Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. I
I guess
think,
not. Yeah.
it is. I mean, it is a bad thing because change is hard and, we are human and we got comfortable with how things were. But I
Definitely.
think that's why you are doing what you're doing. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, is to help people say, I see it coming. How can I
Mm-hmm.
position myself so that I'll be on top of the wave and not underneath it? And so, that's exactly why we're having this conversation with you, and we're really grateful for
Yeah.
everything you're doing.
Definitely. I mean, I heard a good saying the other day. It was, if you know a hurricane is coming, do you tell everyone in the community that the hurricane's coming, or do you pretend it isn't happening? You're going to tell everyone the hurricane's coming because you want everyone to be able to prepare and get out and do whatever they need to do, right? It's the
Right.
same thing here. It's not that we're trying to scare everyone, oh, there's a hurricane coming. It's that we are trying to spread that information so that people can prepare and get out and be ready for when it hits. And
Yeah.
that's the bottom line.
Absolutely. I know that there are things that you can do today to help you prepare for when that hits. It's not you don't have to tear up your whole world. You don't have to quit your job and sell your house and move to
No, nor
a
should you.
cave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, absolutely. And I think it is human nature sometimes too to live in extremes. And while you and I have been talking about this for a long time, so maybe we're able to be a little bit more removed when we talk about it. I again understand this can be scary for a lot of people, especially if it's the first time they're hearing about it. But it doesn't mean, to your point, that you have to upend your entire life. Education is the first step, is what I always say. So just being aware is a huge battle. And I think, again, I applaud everyone who is watching or listening. And then action's the next step, right? But it doesn't have to happen all at once, and nor should it, or nor will it, right? It's a process to prepare too. So
Yeah. For people who aren't familiar with ITM, talk about the opportunities for learning that you make available through ITM trading.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we do specialize in gold and silver and lifelong wealth protection, but our mission truly is education, and that's why I am here. Again, there are a lot of people out there who will say, go buy gold and silver. But like I said earlier, there's different types of gold and silver. There's different reasons you're buying gold and silver, and there's different ways it can protect you. So what we really try and focus on is helping people understand currency life cycles, the coming reset, and again, what action you can take that makes sense for you. So, anytime you talk to someone from our team, who are all incredible, by the way, they focus on education first and foremost, because again, we're trying to build community and make sure that people understand these things, because if they understand it, they can go help someone else understand it. And again, we can all learn and grow together, because I do believe that there's strength in numbers. So
100%. The more people are aware of what's happening and prepare themselves, the better it's going to be for all of us. So
absolutely.
it's not a question of like, I'm doing this and I don't want anyone to know about it because it's all for me. It's actually about spreading the word so everyone's doing what we're doing.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, as we close, is there one piece of financial advice that you think most people will regret not taking?
Um, I don't know if this is quite the answer, but what popped into my head is I see a lot of people in the comments on my videos, and I've been hearing it a lot more recently, that people are saying it's too late to do anything. It's too late. Oh, we missed the window. We should have acted years ago. Oh, well, it's not too late. It is not too late to learn. It is not too late to prepare. it is not too late, right? Like we still have time. The window might be starting to close, like again, as that snowball rolls down the hill, but it's definitely not too late. So I think hope is very important. And I think that if you are just discovering this kind of information today, it's not too late. So keep the faith is really what I would say to people.
That's awesome. I think that's a great place to wrap up for today. And I really hope that we'll be able to have more of these conversations. In the meantime, just remind people how they can find you and learn more about your work.
Yes, absolutely. So I make videos on YouTube for ITM trading. If you go on YouTube and search ITM trading, you will find my show there, Taylor Made Economics. You can also follow me on X at ITM Taylor Kenney, where I will be posting more information, thoughts, sources, all that good stuff. So yeah, those are the two places you can find me. And again, I so appreciate you having me on. This was an awesome conversation.
Likewise, I'm so grateful that you spent the time with us. And as I said, I would love to have you come back and we'll do this again very soon.
Definitely.
Thanks so much, Taylor.
Perfect. Thank you.
And thank you to all of our viewers today for tuning into Collapse Life. Let us know your thoughts and what you're doing to prepare in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. You can also explore more about what we do at collapselife.com. You'll see we have a blog, we have a shop, and we have links to all our different social media channels. So we hope to see you there. We also hope that you'll come back next week and take another deep dive into how to navigate the current chaos. We look forward to seeing you. And until then, just remember, keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.